Hey, how's it going? It is Sunday, October 23rd, and we are at the doorsteps of World War III. You're not kidding around, man. It really is escalating, and people are, it seems to me, not noticing it, okay? But you should be noticing what's happening, because a few things have happened over the last few days that when you add them up, you're like, whoa, NATO is getting ready to invade either Belarus or Western Ukraine, or perhaps both. And let me explain. Well, before I get started with that, go to my Patreon. Today there isn't going to be a roundtable, a regular public roundtable, but I'm doing my Patreon live stream, and I've already gotten a bunch of subscribers. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to today's show. It'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard. And you'll be able to ask questions and make comments to me live on air on the broadcast. So I'm looking forward to that. And, and there's another thing I wanted to mention. Did you guys see yesterday at the Congress of the Communist Party of China when, what's his name? His name always slips my mind. Hu Jintao, the former party secretary, the former bigwig of China, was forcibly removed in the middle of the party congress by Xi Jinping. Well, not by Xi Jinping personally, but rather by his minions. I mean, it was spectacular. I mean, I've never in my life seen such a brutal and ruthless public display of just badassery. I mean, holy shit. See, this is like, imagine if, say, I don't know, Joe Biden at the Democratic Party convention had Barack Obama forcibly removed. I mean, like, it was like that level of like, holy shit, okay? And it was just so funny. And Alexander Mercouris, God love him. He's a great guy. I consider him a friend. And he said in a broadcast yesterday that maybe, what's his name, who was, under the weather or not feeling well. He's an elderly gentleman. Oh, I'm sorry, Alexander. That was just a raw display of power by Xi Jinping. And when this gentleman was forcibly picked up by these stewards, I saw it, okay? They forcibly picked him up out of his chair as he was sitting right to the left of Xi Jinping. And he was removed, and he was, touching other people and like, please save me, And Xi Jinping was just looking straight ahead like, no worries. Oh, that was incredible. I mean, come on, that was incredible. You gotta give the guy, points for ruthlessness, for sheer display of raw power, because no one said a thing. Those 2,700 delegates at the party congress, not one of them said a thing. As this elderly gentleman was walked out, to God knows what fate. Oh my God. I mean, I honestly don't think that anything is going to happen to this poor gentleman because he is an elderly gentleman. I don't think that they're going to pull out his fingernails or something like that. They'll probably shuffle him off to some retirement home somewhere. But like, holy shit, that is a raw display of power. And, that basically, I mean, remember, in this party congress, they gave Xi Jinping another 5 years as basically supreme leader, violating their own constitution and their rules to put him up there for another 5 years. I mean, the guy's got China in his grip like this, man. And that was the whole point of this display of raw power. Anyway, that was just an anecdote. But the thing I want to talk about in this video, and sorry I've gone on so long, are some data points that are appearing. And I want you to pay attention to them. Okay, number one, everyone has noticed how the Russians have been assembling a force in Belarus, in southern Belarus, semi-near Kiev or western Kiev, or to the west of Kiev, rather. Okay, and a lot of people have been thinking, myself included, have been thinking that, this looks like the Russians are getting ready for an offensive out of Belarus into Ukraine. And of course, there is a road, and more importantly, a railroad from the west, from Lviv, all the way to Kiev. And my thinking had been that perhaps this is an effort to cut that line, to end the supply of Western weapons from the West into Ukraine, and part of this overall new war footing that the Russians are on, right? That's what I've been thinking. Okay, now, I've changed my mind, and I'll explain why. See, the data points are that the Poles and the Lithuanians are carrying out exercises right on the Belarusian border. They've got their tanks, they've got their troops, they're wandering around doing this and that in this exercise. And that's one data point. And the other data point is that CBS News in the United States had a sneak peek at the 101st Airborne Division that was all of a sudden in Romania. Now, that's very significant because the 101st Airborne Division has not been on European soil since 1945. And so, you start adding up these little pieces, and as I see it, and perhaps somebody with more military experience can add to this or contradict me or comment on what I'm about to say, but it seems to me that what's going on is that NATO is preparing a fist to hit the Russians. To hit the Russians in Belarus or in Ukraine. Because you have this army, right? I mean, the 101st Airborne Division in and of itself, they're just, they're shock troops, basically. It's in the name, airborne, They're supposed to be dropped in and, have a fight and hold some terrain until an advancing army catches up to them, right? That's the point of them, as I understand it. I could be wrong, Again, a military guy who knows more than me, please tell me. Tell me in the comments. So, you got the Lithuanians and the Poles. With all their gear, it seems to be a very big exercise that they're doing. Smirk. And you got the Americans with the 101st Airborne Division in Romania doing exercises of their own. And really, what are they doing? They're acclimating to this new environment. It seems that what NATO is preparing is a military fist to turn this non-kinetic war that we've been having, because it is a war. It's NATO against Russia. And it's been non-kinetic on the side of NATO so far, except, of course, for the military contractors and volunteers that they have in Ukraine. But, insofar as the optics are concerned, it's still, Russia, Ukraine, not Russia, NATO. But NATO is preparing a military fist. That's what it looks like to me. And they'll have that 101st Airborne Division that they can drop wherever in Belarus or Ukraine and have this Polish-Lithuanian army all geared up, ready to go to advance and link up with that 101st Airborne once it achieves its objectives, whatsoever that objective may be. See, something that you learn in like middle school, right? Or you ought to have learned it in middle school, high school at the latest. See, if you prepare a threat, you better be ready, see? Because, see, if I threaten you, if I cock my fist at your face, right? There are two possibilities. Number one, you back down. And number two, you look at me and you cast a keen eye on me and you decide, is this guy up for it or not? See, the Russians, they're not going to back down. They can't. It's their fucking backyard. It's existential for them. If NATO were to actually invade Belarus or Ukraine, the Russians are going to take off all the gloves, and it's going to be iron fists underneath. They're going to go for broke. Because for them, it is existential. See, the Russians, back in March 11th, if you recall, I think it was March 11th, or around there, 7th or something, it doesn't matter. You can look it up. They hit the Yaboriv installation, which is just west of Lviv, about 25 miles from the border with Poland. Now, Yaboriv was where the NATO officers were training Ukrainian soldiers and officers. And in early March, see, a whole bunch of volunteers, again that word, appeared in whatchamacallit, in Yavoriv. And these volunteers, it's pretty obvious what they were. They were the advance guard of a potential NATO involvement, direct NATO involvement. And so that's why the Russians hit it. In one go, in one night, they killed 400 of these volunteers while they were sleeping with hypersonic missiles and all other kinds of missiles that the West didn't even see coming. And that was the point. That was the point of the exercise. They killed off those 400 men in one go, and they also destroyed $400 million worth of gear, artillery, tanks, armored personnel carriers, all kinds of doodads. They just eviscerated the whole installation in one go. And it was the one time, or one of the very few times, that they've used hypersonic missiles to show NATO, don't fuck with us. We've got what it takes to go all the way. We've got what it takes to hurt you, like we've just done in Yavoriv. And NATO seems to have gotten the message, but of course, they doubled down on all the other crap. The sanctions and this and that, and trying to destroy the Russian economy, regime change in Russia. And how did that go? Good or bad? Pretty badly. See? The Russians had a bad month of March, but by April, May, they were sitting pretty. Their currency was stronger than before, for crying out loud. And all their customers for their natural gas and oil, well, they started selling it to the Indians and the Chinese, They're sitting pretty. They've made more money off of this war than before the war. That's a fact. And even the IMF, the economists at the IMF, which is the most Washingtonian institution imaginable, right? They've said, they've redone their estimates of the Russian economy, and they've admitted that the Russian economy will only contract, rather than the double digits as they thought they would because of the sanctions, it's only contracted 3.5%. Insofar as inflation is concerned in Russia, it's steadily declining, very steadily declining. Unlike the West is screwed. Its inflation is going up the roof. Its GDP is collapsing. Germany is deindustrializing, which is a fancy word for saying everybody's going broke. The non-kinetic side of things has gone Russia's way, all the way, over the last 7-8 months. And insofar as the West, well, they're deteriorating. And so they kind of forgot the message of Yavoriv. The message was, don't fuck with us because we can hurt you. And they're kind of like, it seems to me, they kind of like forgot about it. Or they're just like, oh no, that was just a one-off. That was just like a random thing. Because if you look at the 101st Airborne and the Polish-Lithuanian Army, it's very clear that it is a cocked fist. They are threatening Russia with a kinetic war, with real war. And see, like I said, this is existential for the Russians, number one. So they're going to fight to the death, first. But two, and much more importantly, they've got the military. The West does not. The Europeans, all of the Europeans, the entire NATO grouping, does not have what it takes to fight the Russians. Not in Belarus, not in Ukraine. They don't have what it takes. The biggest NATO army, by the way, aside from the United States, of course, is Turkey. And Turkey, they're not going to send their troops to fight against the Russians. No way. And so it's going to be the Americans. And it's the Americans who came up with this stupid idea. That's pretty goddamn obvious. And see, what the Americans did was, by destroying Nord Stream, which they did, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, by destroying Nord Stream, they removed the possibility of the Europeans scaling back and saying, okay, uncle, this was, the sanctions were a bad idea, let's go to status quo ante. They removed that possibility, so the Europeans have nowhere to go. They can only do what the Americans tell them to do. And the Americans, by giving the go-ahead to the Polish-Lithuanian exercise, and come on, you think that those guys figured out on their own that they're going to do that? No, they got the okay from Washington. By doing these exercises, which of course amasses all these forces and all this gear and equipment, getting it ready. And by putting the 101st Airborne in Romania, where it can be deployed anywhere within, I would guess, a 500-kilometer radius, easily within the range of Ukraine and Belarus, right? They're basically threatening that they're going to invade Belarus and or Ukraine. They're threatening the Russians with this. And of course, the Americans are counting on their superior air force, because the Americans over the last 30 years, over longer perhaps, they have assumed that they will always have air supremacy, that they have the planes and the gear and all the rest of it, that they would own the skies over whatever area of conflict they participate in. It's actually part of the American military doctrine. It's called full spectrum dominance. Look it up. It's this arrogant notion that they will control the entire battle space, as they call it in their McKinsey phrase. They will control the entire battle space, and most especially the air, because of course with air power, you can deliver artillery wherever you want it. But see, the Russians, over the last 50 years actually, they've always known that they can't compete insofar as air dominance. So what have they invested in? Air defense. See, here in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Air Force is gone, just about all gone, because of Russian air defenses. And they haven't used their top-tier gear. They've used the S-300 system. But they also have an S-400 system and an S-500 system. And as I understand it, the S-500 system, people say that it is not yet deployed, others say that it is, but the whole point of that one is that it can intercept ballistic missiles, nuclear ballistic missiles, in the air long before they arrive at their destination. Okay? And that's their top-tier air defense system. That they haven't deployed that one in Ukraine. They haven't deployed the S-400. They've been making do with their third-tier air defense systems so far. Now, of course, moving around aircraft is a simple matter. I mean, they're airplanes. They can go wherever they want very quickly. And so amassing an air force in NATO territory and using it to support the 101st Airborne as it drops in wherever, and using that air power to support the advancing army, the Polish-Lithuanian army. I think that's their idea, that they can do this, that they can achieve, dominance of the battle space, full spectrum dominance. But this is just arrogant. It's just stupid. See? The Russians have shown time and again that their air defense systems are much better. I mean, sometimes they can actually hit artillery shells in the air. The HIMARS rockets, the wonder weapons of the West, that proved useless against Russian air defense systems. They sent over the Zelensky regime. They fired something like, I do believe it was 27 HIMARS rockets at the evacuating civilians, and that alone is a war crime, by the way. They deliberately fired on civilians who were evacuating from Kherson. And those missiles, of course, were guided by the Americans. So the Americans knew that the Zelensky regime was firing on retreating civilians. Anyway, of those 27-odd rockets, only one got through. And so it seems to me that NATO, the Americans, are cocking their fist, but they don't have what it takes. They don't have the gear. I mean, come on, the West itself is saying that they've run out of gear to send to Ukraine, right? But it seems that the Americans, they don't have a reverse gear. Washington does not have a reverse gear. And so this presents an interesting conundrum to the Russians. You see, they want to avoid a Pearl Harbor moment. Pearl Harbor, of course, before World War II, in 1941, the American people in general, were not in favor of going to war with Japan or Germany. They thought it was a bad idea generally. There was a lot of isolationist sentiment. It was only after Pearl Harbor, this disaster, that was, in fact, caused by the Americans. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Well, because of that, public opinion fell in line and everybody went to war, total war. It seems to me that the Europeans, because they are up Schitt's Creek, because they're going to go dark, cold, and hungry this winter, and they know it, and there's nothing they can do about it, especially now that Nord Stream is gone. You know, they might figure the political leadership in Europe might be thinking to themselves, hey, you know, we're going to suffer anyway, so we might as well go to war, and it'll be the perfect explanation and excuse for everybody going cold, dark, and hungry. And the Americans might be thinking to themselves, we've done all these things, so let's just go more, goddammit. I mean, that's been their modus operandi so far. Always doubling down, always insisting on more. They don't know how to negotiate, they don't know how to step back, they only have one direction, one gear forward. So for the Russians, this is a conundrum because, see, if they inflict an absolutely punishing, devastating loss, I mean like a Pearl Harbor moment, right? That'll play into the hands of the Washington and Brussels leadership class who want this war desperately. It'll play right into their hands. And the Russians are not stupid, they know this. I mean, why do you think that they've been assembling troops in Belarus? I used to think that it was in order to do an attack on Ukraine from the north, but it could be that they're setting them up because they got wind of what the Americans are doing and they're preparing. They're preparing to defend Belarus. Anyway, I just wanted to point all this stuff out to you. This video has gone over 20 minutes now, but it seems to me that the West, the Americans, are the ones ginning for war. They are doing everything in their power to go to war. And it's going to be a catastrophe for the West. It's certainly going to be a catastrophe for the people of Belarus and Ukraine and Russia. But see, for them, it's a fight for their lives. For the West, it's not. They can't seem to understand that. But they have turned it into an existential crisis for themselves. The leadership class in the West, in Brussels, in Washington, because they have invested all of their chips into this conflict, they can't back down. So to go back to my original metaphor, you know, it's like in high school or middle school, when the kid who's not really up for a fight just cocks his fist and just, you know, it says nasty things about your mother or something, right? He's cocked his fist, he can't back down. He'll look too bad to everybody. He'll look like a coward. Or he'll look like a faker, like a paper tiger. So he's going to have to swing. That's my fear. Understand what's going on.